Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 5, Chapter 14, Text 16. And this is more detailed instructions from Sukadeva Goswami to Maharaj Parikshit about the wonderful activities that take place under the three modes of material nature, all the exciting adventures. Oh boy, it's nothing but suffering. And he's going into great detail, and has been for the last several verses. But Maharaj Parikshit wanted to know more. He wanted to be instructed in such a way that he could actually transcend the three modes of material nature. So Sukadeva is telling him directly, as his spiritual master, he's telling him, sharing with him realizations of the material nature. So, this is text 16. Ma Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pasaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Tinamani Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pacharani Nirvishesha Sunyavadi Paskitadi Satarni Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Srivas Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Government men are always like carnivorous demons called rakshasas, man-eaters. Sometimes these government men turn against the conditioned soul, take away all his accumulated wealth. Being bereft of his life's reserved wealth, the conditioned soul loses all enthusiasm. Indeed, it is as though he loses his life. Yeah, well, aren't we seeing that right now, in this day and age? What's going on with the different governments in the world and how they're plundering the citizens with these unnecessary wars, and they're stealing away everyone's accumulated wealth by diluting and manipulating the currencies and by taxes. And in this way, the people are being plundered and robbed. Prabhupada compares them here. Well, Sukadeva Goswami 5,000 years ago compared the government men to be carnivorous demons, man-eaters, cannibals. And indeed, they are cannibalizing the society. They're devouring the very society that maintains them. They're cannibalizing it. Now, this is the materialistic. These are people under the modes of material nature. Daivi Varnashram government is different. The taxes are taken, but the goal of life is realized and is served to the best purpose. The government men take, in the Daivi Varnashram, they take shelter of the spiritual guidance for the benefit of everyone. But that's not what's being talked about here. This is the materialistic, where the people are conditioned and the government men are also conditioned souls. And so anything goes. And the government men have the power, they have the military, and they simply plunder the citizens. The thieves, Prabhupada says, cannibals. Commentary by Prabhupada. The word Rajakula Rakshasa is very significant. Srimad Bhagavatam was compiled about 5,000 years ago, yet government men are referred to as Rakshasas, carnivorous demons. If government men are opposed to a person, that person will be bereft of all his riches, which he has accumulated with great care over a long period of time. No one wants to pay income tax. Even government themselves try to avoid these taxes. But at unfavorable times, income taxes are exacted forcibly, and the taxpayers become very morose. That's where we're seeing all the rioting and protesting and that goes on around the world in our present time. Text 17. Sometimes the conditioned soul imagines his father or grandfather has come again in the form of his son or grandson. In this way he feels the happiness one sometimes feels in a dream, and the conditioned soul sometimes takes pleasures in such mental concoctions. Hallucinating. Because attached to the father or the grandfather, in the mind they're attached, so they project that onto a son or a grandson. Oh, come back again. Commentary. Due to ignorance of the real existence of the Lord, the conditioned soul imagines many things. Influenced by fruitive activity, he comes together with his relatives, fathers, sons, grandfathers, exactly as straws gather in a moving stream. In a moment, the straws are thrown everywhere, and they lose contact. In conditional life, the living entity is temporarily with many other conditioned souls. They gather together as family members, and the material affection is so strong that even after a father or grandfather passes away, one takes pleasure in thinking that they return to the family in different forms. Sometimes this may happen, but in any case, the conditioned soul likes to take pleasure in such concocted thoughts. They gather together just like straws in a moving stream. They're related through the body. The father, the grandfather, the son, the grandsons, they're related, just like straws. Sometimes when they're traveling down a stream, the little straws, due to the current, they're all kind of clumped together. But then at some point they're all separated again. Because the clumping together is based on the body. The body's an illusion. When the body is through, then what's going to hold it together? It was the bodily identification that brought everyone together. And when the body is through, then... But still, the conditioned soul likes to imagine that the grandfather or the father is so attached to the family that he's returning again, that he's not ever really going to go away. So they imagine that. But then Prabhupada also says sometimes it does happen. Sometimes the attachment is so strong, they do take birth again in that family or in that household. Maybe not as a person, but as another type of creature, maybe an insect, a cockroach in the wall of the house where the family lives. And then there's the interesting little illustration that was given about the man who was very, very wealthy. He worked so hard to accumulate his wealth. And when he passed away, he left it to all his sons. And then he was so attached, like in this case, this would be a case where someone was so attached they came back. But he didn't actually take birth in the family. He took birth as a very unfortunate person who had to maintain themselves by begging, but he was living nearby his former family. This is his next life. And when he went to the door to beg from his sons, whom he had given everything the sons had, he had given to them in his previous life. And now, due to his karma, he had to take birth as a beggar, and he was coming to beg, and they chased him away, beating him with shoes and broomsticks, and they just chased him away. Yeah, you beggar. But his previous life, he was the one that gave them everything. But this is not recognized, because it's all based on the body. It's based on the body. And because his body had changed, they didn't recognize it was the same soul, the same living entity, just situated differently now in the material energy. So, very illusory, very deceiving. See, sometimes a husband and wife may be so attached to each other that in the next life, the husband comes back as a woman and the wife comes back as a man, and they again marry, only this time the husband's the wife and the wife's the husband. Because at the time of death, if the wife is thinking of the husband, then whatever you're thinking of at the time of death, that's the type of body, so it gets the man's body. And if the husband is attached to the wife, he's thinking, and so he gets the woman's body. So then but they're so attached to each other, those particular souls, that they come, it does a little flip like that. It can happen. It does happen. Not all the time, but it does happen. Or similarly, an enemy, said that a very, someone has a lot of animosity and anger towards someone, is very vengeful, wants to hurt them, may take birth in their family, in that family of that person, as one of their children, and cause them all kinds of problems. So, these things do go on. This is karma. But for the most part, the point being made here is that it's mental concoction. Oh, my grandfather, he's so attached to the family now. He's taken birth as my son. Well, they're just attached, that's all. It's imagination. It's not necessarily the case. But they like to think like that. No knowledge. No real knowledge beyond the body. Text 18. In household life, one is ordered to execute many yagnas and fruitive activities, especially vivaha yagna, the marriage ceremony for sons and daughters, and the sacred thread ceremony. These are all the duties of a grihasta, and they're very extensive and troublesome to execute. They're compared to a big hill over which one must cross when one is attached to material activities. A person desiring to cross over these ritualistic ceremonies certainly feels pain like the piercing of thorns and pebbles endured by one attempting to climb a hill. Thus the conditioned soul suffers unlimitedly. So he's describing here in these different verses the inconveniences of material life, and how difficult it is to do these things nicely, to have to arrange a nice marriage for sons and daughters. It can be very difficult and expensive, but it has to be done. And it's very stressful, that it should be the right situation and the right match, and like this. And it's uphill. This came to a big hill when one is attached materially to material activities. He's under pressure, social pressure as well, to do these things, because the material society expects it. He has to do these things. Prabhupada's commentary. Oh, nice. I didn't see this sentence, but all right, I must be on the right track, because this is Prabhupada's commentary, and this is the first sentence in his purport. There are many social functions for keeping a prestigious position in society. That's depression. In different countries and societies, there are various festivals and rituals. In India, the father is supposed to get his children married. When he does so, his responsibility to the family is complete. Arranging marriage is very difficult, especially in these days. At the present moment, no one can perform the proper ritual of sacrifice, nor can anyone afford to pay for the marriage ceremony of sons and daughters. Therefore, householders are very much distressed when they are confronted by these social duties. It is as though they were pierced by thorns and hurt by pebbles. Material attachment is so strong that despite the suffering, one cannot give it up. Prahlad Maharaj therefore recommends Hidvatma patam grihamanda kupam vanam gato yad dharmasrayeta. The so-called comfortable family position is compared to a dark well in a field. If one falls in a dark well covered by grass, his life is lost, despite his cry for rescue. Highly advanced spiritualists therefore recommend one should not enter the Grihastha ashram. It's better to prepare oneself in the brahmachari ashram for austerities and remain a pure brahmachari throughout one's life, so that one will not feel the piercing thorns of material life in the Grihastha ashram. In the Grihastha ashram, one has to accept invitations from friends and relatives, perform ritualistic ceremonies, and by so doing one becomes captivated by such things, although he may not have sufficient resources to continue them. To maintain the Grihastha lifestyle, one has to work very hard to acquire money. Thus one is implicated in material life, and he suffers the thorn pricks. Yeah. Yeah. Interesting that here Prabhupada is suggesting one not enter Grihastha ashram. Just live a life of austerity. Remain a brahmachari. You won't have to go through all of that. And just fix your mind on Krishna. However, mostly people will enter Grihastha ashram, and most of Lord Chaitanya's followers were Grihasthas. So it's not a disqualification, but it's important to know what it involves. The duties and responsibilities and the social pressures and the pressure to earn money, support family members. But under the guidance of the pure devotees and spiritual master, can navigate through it. It doesn't last. It's a temporary ashram. Grihastha ashram doesn't last. It's temporary. During the prime of one's life, when sex desire is the strongest and the passions are running very high, then there's a concession that one can in family life. And for society, Grihastha ashram is the cornerstone because they supply everything for everybody else by their hard work. So there's a place for everything. But it's not that everyone has to take up Grihastha ashram. Some, whatever's favorable for Krishna consciousness, and accept it. Whatever's unfavorable, reject it. For some, it will be favorable to take up the duties and the ashram, family life. And for others, it will be favorable for Krishna consciousness not to. So, the individual will have to consider in their heart of hearts what is the best path for them to be able to stay favorably engaged in Krishna consciousness. But here, what to expect, the difficulties of what to expect in Grihastha ashram are being, some light is being shed on it, and it's really the case. It has its difficulties. It has its perks, but it has its difficulties also. 19. Sometimes, due to bodily hunger and thirst, the conditioned soul becomes so disturbed that he loses his patience, becomes angry with his own beloved sons, daughters, and wife. Thus, being unkind to them, he suffers all the more. So, hearing these verses, they really do echo exactly what Jad Bharat previously was speaking to Maharaj Rahugana. And Maharaj Parikshit, that conversation between Jad Bharat and Maharaj Rahugana was related to him by Sukadeva Goswami. And Jad Bharat spoke very similar, very, very similar verses. So this really echoes or reinforces what Maharaj Parikshit heard when he heard the conversation between Jad Bharat and Maharaj Rahugana, as Sukadeva told him that conversation. But now Sukadeva Goswami is telling him directly the same things. So the conditioned soul, hunger and thirst, becomes so disturbed, he loses his patience, becomes angry, and then he suffers even more. He's all entangled, confused by his material attachment. Commentary. Srila Vidyapati Thakur has sung, "The happiness of family life is compared to a drop of water in the desert. No one can be happy in family life. According to the Vedic civilization, one cannot give up the responsibilities of family life, but today everyone is giving up family life by divorce. This is due to the miserable condition experienced in the family. Sometimes, due to misery, one becomes very hardened toward his affectionate sons, daughters, and wife. This is but part of the blazing fire of the forest of material life." So disturbed, he lashes out to the very ones that he has dedicated his life to. He lashes out at them. Blazing fire, it's like he's on fire. So disturbed by the material situation. Very, very unhappy situation. Well, those family members actually can't make the person happy. That's the problem. A person invests in making a family because they want to be happy. They want to have people around them that love them, and then he can serve them. He has something to do, and he can try to feel love for his family members. But no one can actually make anyone else happy in that situation. It's not possible. Only Krishna, the Lord within everyone's heart, is able to make anyone really happy. So it's going to be frustration. It's inevitable, it's unavoidable. But it may not become obvious right away. But after some time it becomes obvious. And then sometimes the man and woman can't even stay together. They separate. When that becomes obvious, that they really can't make each other happy, then they separate without understanding that the purpose of being together is not to try to make each other happy. The purpose of being together is to try to help each other advance spiritually and become happy in love of God. But with that missing. And they simply look at each other to try and make each other, and they can't do it. It can't be done. Because they're spirits, they're not material bodies, and they're not identifying, they don't have realization of spirit. They're spiritual beings, servants of the supreme spiritual being. And so they heard someone give a funny little illustration of how it works. Like, you see these big diving suits that people wear for deep diving, with the big round thing with the tube coming out for air, and it's like, and then they have this big suit on. Or similar to like an astronaut suit on the moon. And say they're underwater in these big suits, and they want to try to enjoy each other's intimately. It doesn't work. It does, because the real intimacy is spiritual. It's not material. So these bodies are like those big diving suits. Material nature is like being underwater. So it's not funny, it's pathetic, but it's the case. And we see that people don't stay together. So, text 20. Sukadeva Goswami continued speaking to Maharaj Parikshit. My dear king, sleep is exactly like a python. Those who wander in the forest of material life are always devoured by the python of sleep. Being bitten by this python, they always remain in the darkness of ignorance. They're like dead bodies thrown in a distant forest. Thus the conditioned souls cannot understand what is going on in life. Yes, and this is another echo of the verse Jad Bharat spoke to Maharaj Rahugana. Sleep is like a python. So the python is the one that swallows its prey whole, I believe. Yeah. The boa constrictor wraps around him and chokes him, smothers him, crushes him. But the python, his jaws can come disconnected, which means his mouth can open quite wide, only held together by some skin. And he can swallow his prey whole. So the living entity is swallowed whole like that by sleep, which is, well, a certain amount of sleep is necessary for everyone. You have to take rest. But this is another kind of sleep. This is when one is devoured by sleep. And they remain always in the darkness of ignorance. The darkness of ignorance is the sleep that's being talked about here. That they look like they're walking around, but they're actually asleep. They've been swallowed by the python of the darkness of ignorance, which is a kind of sleep. Because when someone is sleeping, it's not that they're unconscious, it's just that the consciousness is different. So their consciousness is covered. They're not awake, they're not in a wakeful state, having been bitten by the python. It's like a coma. It's like they're in a coma. This is bitten by the python. The python swallows a prey whole, but evidently they bite too. Maybe they have to bite the prey first, kind of stun them before they can swallow them. Anyway, it says here that he's bitten by the python. It's like a coma, walking in a comatose state. Another way it's described, the conditioned soul has amnesia. Sometimes an amnesia patient, amnesia is when something happens, usually a trauma to the head, and it does something, so memory is disturbed, and a person loses memory of their material identification. They can't remember their name, they don't recognize the people that they were in material relationships with, they lose that kind of awareness. And sometimes a way to correct that, sometimes it goes away after time, it heals up, but sometimes another trauma to the head brings it all back. So it's kind of like amnesia. Material identification, identifying with the material body and forgetting the spirit soul. So it's like a coma, having been bitten by a python and gone into a coma, an unconscious state, somewhat, well, yeah, for all intent and purpose, say unconscious, spiritually unconscious. Or amnesia, forgetfulness. And it's interesting if you think of how, with amnesia, if there's a trauma to the head, it can bring everything back. They can get their memory. So sometimes the material nature is very traumatizing. Everything's taken away, or something really devastating happens, a physical disease, or a loved one is taken away. And it's traumatizing. And sometimes that's enough to turn a person toward remembering who they are. They start to come out of the amnesia, start to come out of the comatose state, start to question and ask, who am I? What's happening? Why is it like this? And they start to wake up because the suffering and the trauma is so bad. So that happens with amnesia also. Prabhupada's commentary. Material life means being fully absorbed in eating, sleeping, mating, and defending. Out of these, sleep is taken very seriously. While asleep, one completely forgets the object of life and what to do. For spiritual realization, one should try to avoid sleep as much as possible. The Goswamis of Vrindavan practically did not sleep at all. Of course, they slept some, for the body requires sleep. But they slept only about 2 hours, and sometimes not even that. They always engaged in spiritual cultivation. Nidrahara vihara kari vijito. Following in the footsteps of Goswamis, we should try to reduce sleeping, eating, mating, and defending. Yeah, sleeping. Yeah. One thing that can be done is we have this technology available. We can play softly some chanting while we're sleeping. And in that way, at least hearing Hare Krishna mantra while we're sleeping, we can play that softly all night for however long we take the rest. And when we wake up, we won't be coming from such a far distance of being covered by ignorance, which is what happens when you go to sleep. You go into like the mode of ignorance, go way down there. But if the chanting, hearing the chanting, you have some recording playing, CD or whatever, then don't go as far down, and then because the sound vibration, Krishna, Krishna is there while we're sleeping. Even though we're not vibrating it with our tongue because we're asleep, still it's going in the ears. So that's a good thing to do, actually. And then getting up early. A couple hours before sunrise makes all the difference. Makes all the difference for the whole day. You get up early and chant. And read something, Bhagavatam. Makes all the difference. The Prabhupada says they were only sleeping 2 hours, the Goswamis. Sometimes not even that. So we don't imitate. We don't imitate lifting Govardhan Hill, and we don't imitate the Goswamis. But we can do what we can to a best of our ability, and keep good respect for such a high standard that devotees, pure devotees, have such a high standard like that. And it's not artificial. They're not making a show. It's from within. They're desiring Krishna consciousness so much that they don't want to waste any time. So we can get that desire going, that we want Krishna consciousness, then we'll reduce the sleeping, the eating, the mating, and the defending. They'll start to reduce. Text 21. Srila Prabhupada himself, we could see he was so absorbed in devotional service to the Lord, such a high standard, inconceivably high standard. He was traveling all over the world at a very advanced age. He was in up to his 81st year. He was traveling. I believe he started traveling when he was 69. He left India and came to New York, and then he continued traveling all over the world right up until he was 81. Translating, lecturing, managing, instructing, so many things, and sleeping 4 hours, about 4 hours a night, right up until he was 81. So that's what a taste of devotional service to Krishna does. Actually relishing something so wonderful, you don't want to waste any time. You just want more and more and more and more. That's the greediness. More Krishna, more service. That's the greediness. It's because of getting a taste. You get a taste. Then the taste for the other things backs off. I want to sleep a whole lot, unconscious, drooling, dreaming, hallucinating, sleep. Don't want that. I want to find Krishna. Overeating, wasting money on all that food stuff that you don't need, and then feeling awful afterwards because you ate too much. Instead of having energy, you have less energy because you have to work so hard to digest everything you just stuffed in your mouth. And then that makes you tired. And then there goes the sleep. So, if you get a taste for Krishna, you won't overeat. You'll eat what you need, maintain the body, not hungry, have good energy, and where's Krishna? So, text 21. In the forest of the material world, the conditioned soul is sometimes bitten by envious enemies, which are compared to serpents and other creatures. Through the tricks of the enemy, the conditioned soul falls from his prestigious position. Being anxious, he cannot even sleep properly. He thus becomes more and more unhappy gradually loses his intelligence and consciousness. In that state he becomes almost perpetually like a blind man who has fallen into a dark well of ignorance. Yeah. Yeah, being attacked. When you feel like you're being attacked, the body actually changes. There's adrenaline. It's a chemical in the body. And when one is in constant anxiety like that, the adrenaline is running. And you really can't think very clearly when there's adrenaline. Can't sleep properly. Yeah. Yeah. Becomes more and more unhappy and loses his intelligence and consciousness. It's just coming from attachment. What's the verses in the Bhagavad Gita? Contemplating the object of the senses, attachment develops. From attachment, lust. From lust, anger, you get frustrated. From anger, bewilderment of memory. When memory is bewildered, you don't know who you are, you've fallen into identifying totally with the material body. So, yeah, these enemies, bitten by vicious enemies, try to bring him down. Yeah, because they're all in ignorance. And conditioned souls, they're very cruel to each other. Because each one is interested only in their own individual sense gratification. And they see everything in terms of their own sense gratification. Can it be eaten? Can I have sex with it? If not, what good is it? It's in my way, because those are my goals in my life, right? Can I make money from it? It's exploitive, because it's for one's own sense gratification, which is never satisfied. So these conditioned souls sees other conditioned souls as like that, something for me to exploit. How can I exploit this? Because of the ignorance. But no one's happy. The exploiter certainly isn't happy. He's never satisfied, and he has all this karma he's going to have to deal with. So they attack each other, and someone's a winner, quote-unquote winner, and someone's a loser. And the loser, being attacked like that by the vicious, envious enemies, he loses his prestigious position because he was attacked, he was tricked, he was cheated, he was conspired against, like that. And he can't sleep properly. He's in complete anxiety. He's got all that adrenaline and frustration, and he was attached, material attached, and he had all that lust, and then the anger, and now he's bewildered, and he can't sleep, and he's more and more unhappy. And he loses his intelligence. He becomes perpetually like a blind man fallen into the dark well of ignorance. Ugh. Terrible situation. There's no purport there. Text 22. The conditioned soul is sometimes attracted to the little happiness derived from sense gratification. Thus, he has illicit sex, steals another's property. At such a time, he may be arrested by the government or chastised by the woman's husband or protector. Simply for a little material satisfaction, he falls into a hellish condition, put in jail for rape, kidnapping, theft, and so forth. Oh boy, don't we see it? The prisons are full. And what about the ones who haven't been apprehended yet? They're out there trying to take, they want a little happiness. So they try to just take it, just take the happiness. It doesn't work like that. It doesn't work like that. It's stealing. A little illicit sex is going to steal something like that. or property. He's going to steal someone's property. Put into jail. Prabhupada's commentary. Material life is such that due to indulgence in illicit sex, gambling, intoxication, and meat eating, the conditioned soul is always in a dangerous condition. Meat eating and intoxication excite the senses more and more, and the conditioned soul falls victim to women. In order to keep women, money is required. To acquire money, one begs, borrows, or steals. Indeed, he commits abominable acts that cause him to suffer both in this life and in the next. Consequently, illicit sex must be stopped by those who are spiritually inclined or who are on the path of spiritual realization. Many devotees fall down due to illicit sex. They may steal money and even fall down from the highly honored renounced order. Then, for a livelihood, they accept menial service and become beggars. It's therefore said in the Shastras, Yan maitunari griyamedi sukam hitucham. Materialism is based on sex, whether illicit or licit. Sex is full of dangers, even for those who are addicted to household life. Whether one has a license for sex or not, there is great trouble. Bahu dukabak. After one indulges in sex, many volumes of miseries ensue. One suffers more and more in material life. A miserly person cannot properly utilize the wealth he has, and similarly, a materialistic person misuses the human form. Instead of using it for spiritual emancipation, he uses the body for sense gratification, and therefore he's called a miser. So, Prabhupada hits the nail on the head right there. Materialism is based on sex. Yeah, that's the big one. That's the big one that gets everyone. That's how we appear in the world, is through a sexual union. So it's a pretty big one, sex. It's full of dangers. Prabhupada says even in household life there can be dangers if one is too addicted to sex, because it's material sense gratification. It's interesting here how devotees, Prabhupada says, many devotees fall down due to illicit sex. He says, must be stopped. Illicit sex must be stopped by those who are spiritually inclined or on the path of spiritual realization. He's pretty specific there. Illicit sex must be stopped. Many devotees fall down due to illicit sex. They steal money and fall down from the highly honored renounced order. And then they accept menial services and become beggars. Wow. So the intelligent person, when they hear this coming from the pure devotee of the Lord, so clear, so specific, ones with first-class intelligence, they get it. Yeah, okay, I've got it. I hear. I see what it is. It's all explained here. The whole sequence is explained. Illicit sex, then steal money, and then fall down like that. And those that are not so intelligent, they hear it, but it doesn't really, it's not really a realization. They heard it, they accepted it, but it's not a very deep realization at that point. But then they see somebody else go through it, and then they get it. Yeah, okay. Yeah. Yeah, there's no question of me ever doing that. Yeah, I've got it. And then there's a type of intelligence where they hear it, person hears it. Oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And they see somebody go through it. They see someone fall down from a high position because of illicit sex. And then they see, all the things that happen after that, maybe stealing money, and then they see the person is degraded down into whatever just to maintain themselves, working like a dog, basically. But they don't get it because the desire is still there in their own heart, and they're not willing to root it out. They're still, on some level, they're still thinking there's something there to enjoy. And so then they go through it themselves. They fall down, there's some temptation, they fall down, they engage in illicit sexual activity, and then they get the benefit of that. The result of that, it's not a benefit, the result of it is they lose their spiritual standing and end up just trying to maintain the body and way out in left field somewhere, not realizing what happened. But eventually they understand. So there's different ways to learn. And then there's the very, very unfortunate person who even goes through it themselves and still doesn't learn, and they go through it again, and then they go through it again and again, and at some point they may get it, hopefully. It could drag on for lifetimes, but eventually it's what has to happen. Illicit sex has to be given up. The way to do that is not artificial. Artificially doesn't do anything. But the way that goal is reached is by becoming attracted to Krishna. Hearing about Krishna, chanting about Krishna, associating with Krishna's devotees, purifying the senses by engaging them in devotional service, following the 4 regulative principles. Prabhupada says here, meat eating and intoxication excite the senses. And so they make the conditioned soul very vulnerable to sex desire. So the food stuff should be food that is acceptable to Krishna, be offered to Krishna, taken as Krishna's mercy, Krishna's prasadam, and no intoxications. Because they excite the senses, and then how is a person going to control their sex desire if their senses are all inflamed? So, text 23. Learned scholars and transcendentalists, therefore, condemn the materialistic path or fruit of activity because it's the original source and breeding ground of material miseries, both in this life and in the next. Learned scholars and transcendentalists condemn the path or fruit of activity. Prabhupada's commentary. Knowing the value of life, karmis create situations whereby they suffer in this, not knowing the value of life. Karmis create situations whereby they suffer in this life and the next. Unfortunately, karmis are very attached to material sense gratification. They cannot appreciate the miserable condition of material life, neither in this life nor in the next. Therefore, the Vedas enjoin that one should awaken to spiritual consciousness, utilize all his activities to attain the favor of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The Lord himself says in Bhagavad Gita, Yat karosi yat ashnasi, yat jahosi dadasi yat tapasyasi kantaya, tat kurusva madarpanam. O son of Kunti, all that you do, all that you eat, all that you offer and give away, as well as all austerities that you may perform, should be done as an offering unto me. The results of all one's activities should be utilized not for sense gratification, but for the mission of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The Supreme Lord gives all information in Bhagavad Gita about the aim of life, and at the end of Bhagavad Gita he demands surrender unto him. People do not generally like this demand, but one who cultivates spiritual knowledge for many births eventually surrenders unto the lotus feet of the Lord. Bahunam jamanamante janamam prapadyate. Yeah, they generally don't like this demand. Surrender to me. Offer everything to me. So then the little jiva says, well, what about me? You want everything. Well, then there won't be anything for me. What about me? What about my sense gratification? You want me to satisfy you. What about my sense gratification? Doesn't work like that. That is material vision. If you have two materially conscious living entities, and you have one piece of pie, one of them is going to eat that piece of pie and the other's not going to get any. That's material. But Krishna is not like that. If you satisfy Krishna's senses, then everyone, the whole creation, is satisfied, because he's the source of all living beings. It's like the root of a tree. Water the roots of the tree, the whole tree flourishes, because the root is, everything is emanating from the roots. It's all coming like that. I don't know, one of the scriptures, one of the Upanishads maybe, there's one of them, there's the example, and maybe in more places than one, of the parts of the body. So when the food goes to the stomach, the whole body is nourished, because the nutrients are processed in the stomach and then spread throughout the entire body. Now, if the hand says, well, what about me? I'm always putting the food in the mouth and it goes into the stomach and I never get to, what about me? I want to eat the food separately, myself. So the hand just sort of like squishes whatever it is, the rice or the sabji or whatever, and just squishes and won't put it in the mouth and the stomach. What's that? What is that? But if the hand takes the food and puts it in the mouth and the stomach, then the hand gets the nourishment. So Krishna is like that. All that you offer, all that you give away, all that you do, all austerities, done as an offering to me. It's like put the food in the stomach. You won't be without. You're not going to get left out. You're part of Krishna. We're all part of Krishna. So it takes a while sometimes for that to be realized. Prabhupada says, one who cultivates spiritual knowledge for many verse eventually surrenders unto the lotus feet of the Lord. And by the association of the pure devotees and the sincere followers of the pure devotees, this process is considerably speeded up. This process of being able to surrender. Text 24. Well, actually, I think we'll stop here. Hare Krishna. Glories to Prabhupada.